Functional Behavior Assessment for persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities and mental illness.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Carol Anthony, and I am standing in for Charles Young this morning. I am currently a staff member in the Disability Services Division at DHS, and I'm pleased to introduce Dan Baker this morning, who is going to be speaking on functional behavior assessment for a person with intellectual or developmental disabilities and mental illness. And Dr. Dan Baker, just a quick bio, an introduction for Dr. Dan Baker. He joined the Jensen Olmstead Quality Assurance and Compliance Office on December 1st of 2015 as the Jensen Internal Reviewer and Positive Support Lead. Dr. Baker is also part of the Disability Services Division Community Capacity Building Team. He is involved with the design, development, and monitoring of treatment programs to align with the positive supports and person-centered culture. Dr. Baker's clinical focus is on positive behavior support, models of community and educational support, transition services, and mental health services for persons with disabilities. Previously, Dr. Baker was the Director of Community Positive Behavior Support, Transition, and Supported Employment Projects, and Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the Boggs Center on Developmental Disabilities at Rutgers University Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. Personally, I know that Dr. Baker is an avid musician, a fantastic bass player, and also a Chicago Blackhawks fan. We are very excited to have him speaking today. We know that this topic we get a lot of questions about, and so we're excited to just dive right in. All right. So just an overview of the purpose of the Positive Support Community of Practice. The purpose of this is to provide training and technical assistance on the requirements in the Positive Supports Rule in 245D regarding positive support, emergency use of manual restraint, and the creation of positive support transition plans. And then when we do questions today, actually Dr. Baker welcomes people to submit their questions as they have them. So we'll also have Q&A at the end if that's how people prefer to do it. But if you do have questions throughout, just email them into the WebEx chat box, and we will be monitoring that. And I'm sorry? I'm sorry, the WebEx Q&A, not the chat box, and we will be answering them kind of on an ongoing basis throughout the presentation. And just also before we start, we wanted to let you know of some additional training opportunities we have. If you have questions on person-centered thinking and planning training, there's a link to the Institute on Community Integration at the University of Minnesota where you can find information on ongoing trainings there. They also have a positive behavior support intensive training going on, and if you click that link, you can find information there. And then all other information on person-centered or positive behavior support training opportunities, that bottom link, you can, if you want to email that university contact, they'll be able to assist you with any questions you have. And then for DHS resources, we have our eDocs that you can all go and see, the Positive Support Rule. There's a link to the Disability Services Division Training Handouts archive page where you'll be able to find all of our Positive Support Community practices that we've had so far, as well as Dr. Baker's presentation today. And then if you want to, we welcome everyone to subscribe to the DSC eList, and if you click that link, you'll see instructions on how to do so. And without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Dan Baker.
Thank you very much, Carol. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics and an area I have worked in for many years, which is how to bring together information regarding the nature of problem behavior with information regarding the nature of mental health and mental health symptoms, and along with bringing together information about mental wellness. Of course, before I launch into my presentation, speaking about bringing things together, we all know that Minnesota suffered a grievous loss last week. So I do have to begin this presentation by saying, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. A quick moment of silence for Prince, and then we'll get going. And if anybody is troubled that I started my presentation off like that, please just blame Carol, because she egged me on and said I could. So good. Launching right in. Now, oftentimes, we do handle and manage information about challenging behavior and mental health very separately. We have different plans, we have different assessments, and often mental health professionals and behavioral professionals do not talk. They don't speak with each other. And I have spent much of my professional career trying to solve that, trying to get people to speak together, trying to get people to bring together their information about the nature of a challenging situation and create a unified understanding of what is really going on. Probably, we've all been in situations where somebody says, well, I think this is a mental health problem. Somebody else says, oh, I think it's a behavioral problem. And we're left asking, is it either, neither, or both? And overwhelmingly, during my career, I've seen one answer to that question. That answer is both. In Ms. Anthony's introduction to me, she noted that I had previously run a behavior support technical assistance project in New Jersey, working with people who had the most severe and intractable challenging behaviors across that state. New Jersey is a small state in size, but a gigantic state in terms of population, with 9 million people, probably 10 million total, packed into a small area. I know that this is not a conversation we can have today, but everybody just start to think. What percentage of people in our caseload also had a mental health disorder? Ding, 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 96%. And the 4% who didn't were largely people without significant challenging behaviors who were just being included in our project as a means for gathering additional service and such. So 96%, that's a staggering number. In my work here in New Jersey, I'm seeing that statistic. I've not gathered full data on that yet. That'll be ready tomorrow, I hope. But I'm seeing overwhelmingly the same pattern. People with the most severe and intractable challenging behaviors often also have a mental health disorder. And if they don't have that, it might be because there are challenges in just getting proper diagnosis made. One of the areas I have worked in is bringing that understanding of the nature of challenging behavior into the functional behavior assessment and make that an instrumental part of gathering our clinical understanding regarding the nature of challenging behaviors. If I may, I'd like to start off by just getting us on the same page and talking a little bit about what functional behavior assessment is. Functional behavior assessment is not a document. It is a process that often results in the creation of a high-quality document. A functional behavior assessment answers a number of questions. First, it answers what the behavior is. When I'm working with teams who are struggling to support somebody with challenging behaviors, there is often disagreement on the team about what it is. And I will start by trying to define the it. What is the behavior we are concerned about? That includes typically getting people together for a solid operational definition, which describes exactly what we are seeing. Let me give you an example of why that is important. How many of you work with people who engage in self-injury? Everybody raise your hands. I can't see you now. Oh well, probably a lot of your hands are up. With self-injury, keep your hand up if you work with somebody who hits themselves in the face. Many hands remain up. Keep your hand up if that person uses an open hand to slap at their face. Now raise your other hand if that person uses a closed fist to hit their face. How is this relevant? An open hand to the face makes a lot of noise, but is not nearly as damaging. A closed hand to the face makes less noise and is very damaging. How does that become relevant? Well, we can start with a playbook that an open hand might be used to gather attention because it makes a lot of noise and people will look. A closed hand is less likely to be done for means of attention because it does not make noise and is difficult to detect unless you're looking. So the first step of the functional behavior assessment is identifying what the behavior is. The second step is identifying why the behavior occurs. We're trying to figure out what the nature of the behavior is and why the person is engaging in that behavior. Two specific things are called out in federal law regarding functional behavior assessment. Number one, it is called out that the FBA should determine if the behavior is an attempt to communicate. Why is that? Because it tells you exactly what your main body of intervention is going to be. That main body of intervention is going to be teaching the individual to communicate. Now, that may not happen quickly. Teaching people to communicate often takes a very long time. And I do call out a prior webinar done with the PSCOP by Professor Joe Richley, who taught me quite a bit about teaching people to communicate when I was back getting my doctorate at the University of Minnesota. It will not be your only means of intervention. Why is that? Because what are you going to do while the person learns to communicate? We must use other interventions as well in the short run. And also, usually when somebody's engaging in a long-term pattern of behavior, there are probably other factors that come into the picture as well. The second thing called out in federal law is whether the behavior is the result of a medical condition. What's going on here? Well, it's called out for the same reason, because your first line of intervention is going to be addressing that medical condition. However, it is not the only intervention you will probably be using, for the same reasons as why teaching to communicate is not the only intervention you'll be using as well. We've all had in our lives any number of circumstances where we have been supporting a person with challenging behaviors and there is a medical condition which is driving it. Sometimes those can be difficult to detect, and sometimes it requires us getting a full medical workup done and feeding to the medical provider, the doc, or APRN or whatever, feeding to that medical professional what we see going on. Now, how do we complete a functional behavior assessment? Most typically, the FBA is completed with interview of relevant care providers, interview of the focus person, and also supported by observation and data collection. This is not a webinar on how to do an FBA, but of course, I do just want to give a couple of my big highlights on completing FBA. It is so important to gather information from knowledgeable care providers. And how many of us have been in situations where we do not have care providers who are super knowledgeable about the individual? There is a much bigger problem there than just the challenging behavior. So care provider input, family input, those are both critical. But an area our field does not pay enough attention to is interview of the focus person, him or herself, and getting information from that human being about their perspectives on what is contributing to the problem behavior. One of the things that we in Minnesota have figured out that other states have not is how to bring together behavior support and person-centered thinking. One of my first days working here in Minnesota, I was stunned that a PBS meeting was focusing a lot on person-centered thinking. And I wondered to myself, when are we going to talk about positive behavior support? And only after that meeting was I told, because I ask foolish questions all the time, that, Dan, it is part of behavior support. And I was stunned by that, and I continue to be impressed with the high-quality work that is done here in Minnesota. So here, I'm really just talking about how to bring together knowledge about nature of challenging behavior with mental illness. I'm also talking about the fact that person-centered thinking and the information gathered there can be a brilliant way to introduce the perspective of the individual into the behavior support process. There's only been a few articles published about how to gather some of that information from individuals to lend power to a functional behavior assessment. Really, one of the few articles I know of is one that was done by Mike Waymeyer, Rick Blumberg, Rick Harrison, and myself, and published back in 2008. So how to ask people what they think is going on. It is also critical to support people's opinions with observation and data collection. With observation, simply watching and seeing what's going on. Now, one of the things we know is when the behavior specialist or the clinician or the outside person is there, problem behaviors never occur, right? Number one way to get no problem behaviors on a day is have somebody show up and observe. So what I have typically done when I'm doing observation is, if possible, I like to go in without, and I go in a setting as a new hire. I'll go in just as a new hire who's touring the site. And because that often happens a lot, particularly when there's a lot of turnover, that is not something that will completely change the environment. So I've done that a few times, and that more than a few times, and that has been really helpful. What's happened a few times, sometimes people will tell you things that they shouldn't tell you, and then you have to report that to the manager. And then also supported by data collection. If this wasn't recorded, I actually would have told what really happened there. And then data collection backed up by observational data collected by care providers, which can be helpful in determining patterns of behavior. Now, what is an FBA really supposed to develop? A functional behavior assessment is supposed to gather information in 4 basic categories. And I really love the O'Neill et al. Book. When they talk about functional behavior assessment, the last page of their interview form gives a 4-column format for doing the summary of the challenging behavior. Sometimes that is called the graphical depiction of the hypothesis. Other times it is called the summary statement. For me, that summary is the most important part of the FBA. Why is that? Because you can show families, care providers, and other knowledgeable folks exactly what is going on. And when I'm designing behavior support interventions with teams of care providers, what I do is I start off with that 4-component or 4-column model there. I start off with a 4-column model, and I just guide teams in brainstorming and looking at all the different interventions that might come up with me guiding. That summary statement is incredibly important, and it's incredibly powerful. It gives people a thumbnail understanding of what is going on. Those 4 components are listed on this slide. Component 1 is the setting event, sometimes referred to as the establishing operation. It depends on which behavioral theorist you like in terms of which term you use. Setting event or establishing operation is something which alters the reinforcing, the positive, or aversive negative properties of potential antecedents. They explain why the antecedent can be a bigger deal some days than other days. Second column is the antecedent. That is the thing which immediately precedes or triggers the problem behavior. Some people do not like the word trigger, particularly people who are from some other service elements where there can be acts of violence with triggers there. So there are some groups who don't like the word trigger. I do use it, though, because it is something which is immediately obvious and understandable to the listener. The immediate causal relationship of antecedent and then problem behavior. Third column is the problem behavior. And that there is the problem behavior which serves a function for the individual. And last up, the consequences. Those are the events which reward the problem behavior, and those events can be either external to the person or internal to the person. And I'll give a lot of examples over the remainder of this webinar. Let's look next at the setting events and antecedents. And I already described these a little bit, but I want to highlight further that setting events are the events which don't trigger the problem behavior by themselves, but they make the problem behavior a whole lot more likely, essentially raising the valence or importance of subsequent antecedent events, demand, reprimand, or whatever. Setting events can include environmental, social, or physiological events. So think about it this way. On a good day, you can give somebody a demand, for example, to go get that, do this, brush your teeth, download the album Controversy by Prince, which is the greatest album yet. Okay, we'll just keep going. So you can give somebody a demand. But if they're in a bad mood for any one of a number of reasons, that demand will cause a subsequent problem behavior or kerfluffle. I like the term kerfluffle. It is a clinical, technical term. So if somebody is in a perfectly fine mood, minor irritations of life or minor frustrations aren't going to be that big of a deal. But there are some days when that minor irritation, frustration, demand, reprimand, etc., will cause massive problems. This often confuses care providers because they're like, well, yesterday I asked the person to do this and it was no big deal. And today I asked the person to do this and it was a massive deal. That is when we must become detectives and figure out what setting events may be in play. Think of this. Have you ever been supporting somebody and you knew they were in a bad mood, and the slightest thing might set that person off? Now, at least a few of you are probably thinking of spouse, partner, or whatever. It's true. It happens for all of us. But let's keep it limited to our work lives. So you have somebody who gets off the bus, gets off the van, shows up at work, shows up at school, comes home from something, and you know that they are in a horrible mood, and the rest of the day is going to be terrible, and something bad is going to happen. That is a circumstance in which there is often a setting event at play. Sometimes you might know what it is, and other times you are guessing at best. In these circumstances, when it happens in a transition from one event to another, one place to another, one activity to another, one circumstance to another, this is where it's so important that we share information about what might have happened or what was going on. Now, how many of you have tried to explain the technical term of setting event and antecedent, or establishing operation and antecedent, to care providers? It is very difficult. It's a very tough concept to teach. So about, oh gosh, you know you're getting old when you say about 15 or 20 years ago, but that's about how long it was. 15 or 20 years ago, I came up with this other way to teach the concept of setting event and antecedent. What sets you up and what sets you off. It is not a technically elegant way to describe, but it works when we're trying to explain to care providers what's happening. Families, et cetera, who may not have the technical training, may not have gone through 4 days of positive behavior support training, the concepts have inherent understandability. They make sense. Somebody is set up for a bad day, and then something sets you off. Let's look at some examples here. Number one, environmental examples. Environmental setting events may occur when a person's routine is disrupted and he or she may be unable to predict upcoming events. So there is a disruption to normal daily life. Minnesota, like New Jersey, is a state where there is inclement weather in the winter. And I spent years working with circumstances where when there is a nor'easter storm and the day is messed up by that bad weather, people have endless challenging behaviors. Except, since that's a New Jersey example, I got to say it like this. Hey, so there was one of those nor'easters, right? And next thing you know, bada boom, bada bang, we got a problem behavior. So I hope somebody at least is laughing. It doesn't matter if nobody else is, because it entertained me. So you got a terrible weather, and the rest of the day is characterized by massive challenging behavior. How about this one? Somebody's work site is unusually loud, which puts the person in a very bad mood. I was in one situation where, oh, and by the way, I always have to shoehorn this in. Problem behavior in every state in the United States is used as a reason for why somebody should not be eligible for competitive work. That is absolutely the wrong way of looking at life. Not only should that person have access to competitive, meaningful work, that person might need competitive, meaningful work more than anybody else. That is a lesson I discovered when I was in grad school here in Minnesota, that people, when they work, they are better off. Now, is that a challenge? You know it. A comprehensive functional behavior assessment can also be used as an assessment for figuring out work sites that will work for people. We all know we believe in data, right? We believe in solid information. We have to use evidence-based practices. Years ago, the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA, identified supported employment as one of the 6 evidence-based practices in treatment for mental illness. Employment is key. But back on our original topic, somebody's work site might be unusually loud, and now they're frustrated, and they're in a bad mood. And then what happens? Problem behaviors may occur at work. Second type of what sets me up, or setting event, social examples. Now, social examples here, somebody might be in a bad mood because of being left alone for a period of time. Maybe that person has fought with a family member or a roommate, and they're very upset. Maybe that person is lonely and in a bad mood because of that. Let's say their family is 1,200 miles away. That's just me, sorry. Let's say that they just broke up with their significant other. Let's say they're being taunted or teased. We're going to talk about post-traumatic stress disorder in 2 slides. What I've seen overwhelmingly for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities is they often cannot cope with being taunted or teased or looked at on the bus or having somebody make a snide comment out in public, and that person is now set up for massive challenging behaviors until they get over it and cope with it, however long that is. And then third up, physiological examples. Illness, pain, sleep deprivation, hunger. Oh, how about medication changes? Those are all examples of internal physiological events which can increase the likelihood of problem behavior. I was working with one young adult woman with intellectual disabilities who had some of the most complex, difficult to interpret, severe instances of self-injury. We had so much trouble figuring out why some days were so much worse than other days. And we ended up with very thorough review of data over 6 months and intensive tracking. We were able to identify that new staff person, illness, and sleep troubles were 3 significant contributors to the increased likelihood of problem behaviors. The challenge in figuring this out and why we needed 6 months of data is these circumstances were not frequent. It was infrequent enough that it was difficult to detect patterns of behavior. So we had to look at multiple different setting events that were in play. And one of the things I would argue is that mental illness should be considered one of these critical setting events. I'm going to talk through some of the examples I've run across in my career. Number 1, how many of you work with people who have an anxiety disorder. What do I define an anxiety disorder as? It means that an event, generalized anxiety disorder here in specific, an event which to you or I might be neutral or just mildly nerve-wracking, to this individual becomes overwhelmingly nerve-wracking. And it turns into what we as behaviorists would say a highly aversive stimuli. Now, what happens when people have a highly aversive stimuli? It triggers massive escape-motivated behavior. So we've all worked with somebody with anxiety disorder, and we puzzle with why we have some problem behaviors which may be difficult to interpret and difficult to understand. We may see a significant repeating pattern of escape-motivated behavior which we don't get. That becomes a moment in which we ask, is there an anxiety disorder at play which is making this one stimuli highly nerve-wracking and triggers the escape-motivated behavior? These can be difficult to detect because the stimuli to you or I is normal. So I'll give a couple stories, making sure this isn't good. No, I did not give this one later. I had to just check ahead in the slides. One person I worked with had never taken the public bus. This individual used a wheelchair, and this individual's entire life, he or she had been told, well, you can't take the regular bus because you use a wheelchair. Now, the public transit district, all the buses become lift-equipped, but the person still isn't using the public bus. So the person finally, as a result of one of the annual planning meetings, the goal is made to teach this person to ride the public bus. Super, awesome. Who is being paid? Who is eligible for being paid for travel training? Well, not the residential provider, the vocational provider. So this individual is going to be trained how to take the public bus on the way to work. Is being late to work a stressful event? Yes, it is. Absolutely. So we're starting to stack up the problems here. Never taken a public bus, doing something brand new, which in and of itself is a little stressful to some people. You should have seen me the first day I took the bus to get to downtown St. Paul. Now, not only are they on taking a public bus for the first time, they're going to work, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about me again, and using a wheelchair, and worried about how they'll get on the bus and whether it'll work or not. So this person is already set up for problems. Waiting at the bus stop and looks up the street a block away and sees there is one person who uses a wheelchair getting on before him. Now, what are the odds of that? Pretty darn low, but that's just what happened. So this individual looks up the street, sees that somebody else with a wheelchair is about to get on, starts to think, wait a minute, will I get on? I'm not going to get on. That person's getting on. There won't be room for me. The travel trainer, who doesn't know this individual particularly well, starts to try and argue this guy out of his anxiety. Now, how well does it work to argue somebody out of anxiety? Not well. In fact, It doesn't work. So the trying to talk the person out of the anxiety turned into an argument. Now everybody's mad, and now the travel trainer gets eye gouged. Now this behavior made no sense to the travel trainer, made no sense to anybody else, which is why I was called in to look at it. I looked at the situation and said, there's something else going on here. Why did this trigger massive escape-motivated problem behaviors? Because what happened after the said eye gouge, the travel trainer grabbed the joystick of the powered wheelchair and drove this individual back to his home without consent. So now what do we have going on? You make the call. So that's why I got called in ultimately. So there's something else going on here. So as I looked into gathering data, I saw that this individual got very upset from time to time at home. But there were never really any significant problem behaviors with this at home because staff people would just say, hey, you're sort of upset. You know, I'll just let you chill out a little bit and calm down. So problem behaviors never ensued. This individual also got nervous at work. But what happens if you're at work and you lose your cool? You get fired. And if I were telling this story a few months ago, I would have actually done an impression of Donald Trump saying you're fired. But now that's political, and I can't talk about that or else I'll get fired. This is not a political comment. I would have just done an impression of a certain celebrity. So we'll keep going or I won't be asked to ever do a webinar again. So, and I want to do one on mental wellness, shameless plug. He knew he would be fired if he lost his cool at work because this is a community job. So this fella gets very nervous a lot. But it's only in this circumstance that it turned into a massive aggressive act that caused some injury and resulted in a lot of other sequelae happening. So I looked at this guy and said, what else could be going on here? Why do some things cause him to get so upset? So I started to look at his mental health diagnoses. There is no diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. There was, however, a diagnosis of primary schizophrenia undifferentiated NOS. And I said, this doesn't fit. So I gathered a lot of data about what was happening. We got a second opinion from a qualified mental health professional, and he was re-diagnosed as having generalized anxiety disorder. Now, what happened here from that diagnosis? What happened is now we can start working with him properly. All of these problem behaviors, one of which was real high intensity, the others which were lower intensity, now they start to make sense. We are understanding the nature of the behavior. How is it that we're understanding it? Because we can look at this and say, some things cause anxiety, and some things cause massive escape-motivated behaviors which we don't quite understand until now. Now we can start to work with him. And much of our focus became teaching relaxation and teaching coping skills. This story is actually many years old. I still tell it because this story was the beginning of me really trying to weave understanding of mental illness and mental wellness into my functional behavior assessments and also into subsequent intervention plan strategies and guidance. So we could not just run around trying to chase down everything that's made this fella anxious. We could not try to say, oh, there's this incident, there's that other incident. This guy just gets upset sometimes and we don't understand why. And let me tell you, that's exactly how people worked with this fella. He just gets upset. We don't understand why. Some things really throw him off. We're not sure what it is. He's just a high-strung guy. He's just nervous. And the tragic part of this story is not that the travel trainer got eye gouged. The tragic part of this story is that this fella was so anxious and so miserable for so many years of his life. When we started to work with him properly, with interventions that were informed by his generalized anxiety disorder, we were able to make his life qualitatively different. Now, you can say, oh, sure, get medication. And yes, that was a key part of what happened. But that wasn't the end of the story. This fellow was in his 30s, and he had 30 years of seeing the world through anxiety-colored glasses. And if anybody wonders, I did make that up myself. That's not relevant. But I like that. Anxiety-colored glasses. So sure, we got proper medication, and we also got him off the powerful neuroleptics he was on to treat the schizophrenia, which never existed. But we had to teach this guy relevant skills to help break him out of some of the patterns of behavior he was in. Now, you see the bottom there. There's a star, and that says mental wellness factors are relevant. If I could sing better, I'd sing, there's a star in the mental wellness factors. I quote movies and music a lot. There is a star next to that because mental wellness factors, in the absence of an identified mental health disorder, are relevant too. When people are not mentally well, they don't have happy, good things going on in their lives. They don't have things to keep them creatively stimulated. They don't feel like they have coping skills and stress management skills. They are also immediately set up for problem behaviors around the clock and across the board. And as I mentioned, I've already given a shameless plug that I would like to, if I don't sufficiently bother people during today's webinar, I'd like to have the opportunity to come back and do a webinar on mental wellness factors from a evidence-based perspective, working off of Joanne Cannon's 15 wellness factors, which were statistically verified. So mental wellness factors are relevant because people need good things going on in their lives, and when they have good things going on in their lives and things to keep them mentally well, they are much less likely to engage in challenging behaviors. And I will tell you that my clinical practice changed dramatically after I started bringing mental wellness considerations in, and I started to include them as specific planned interventions, particularly when I was working with people who I don't know where to start. There's so much going on. There's so much that's wrong in somebody's life. What I'll often do is try and start with creating things that are right with the person's life and use that as planned behavioral intervention, which again brings us back to person-centered thinking. Person-centered thinking is a beautiful way to gather information about somebody's life and what they want. However, with person-centered thinking, sometimes we need to challenge ourselves and bring in more of a future orientation too, and sample things like contact with nature, creativity, because the lives of so many people I have worked with, particularly the lives of people with chronic problem behavior and mental health challenges, there's just not a lot good going on. And we have to deliberately sample things and figure out what else the person might really like. So I start off with a consideration of anxiety disorder. And I want to just sum up that when you have people who are engaging in escape-motivated behavior, especially when that escape motivation comes at times you don't understand, ask yourself, is there an anxiety disorder present? And one of the things I will do, there's no clinical data behind this, but if you're working with somebody and you start to feel a little nervous yourself, how many of you are empathetic or empathic? What's the right word? When somebody has some emotion, you feel it yourself. What's the right word? Empathetic. What's empathic then? Oh, that's like from Star Trek. Never mind. We'll keep going. Empathetic. When somebody is empathetic, if you are, and you feel yourself starting to get nervous for somebody else, that might be a cue that there is an anxiety disorder present within the other person. So when that escape motivation, you are struggling to understand why they're so highly escape motivated, look for whether an anxiety disorder is present. Now, of course, we only know that people with certain credentials can make that diagnosis. But what can you do if you don't have those credentials? You can bring information about what you see, specific examples, specific anecdotes, and data. And that is something that will help the properly credentialed person make that diagnosis. Well, we already mentioned anxiety. Let's now look at anxiety's evil cousin, depression. With depression, I have worked with a legion of people with disabilities who also experience depression. What might depression look like from a behavioral perspective? Things that used to be highly reinforcing suddenly are not. And the person's motivation to do things can disappear. As a behavioral professional, how many of us have asked, boy, why doesn't this behavior support plan using natural or other rewards work anymore? Why isn't this behavior plan working? This person used to be motivated to earn points. They used to be motivated by natural awards. They used to want to get up in the morning and go to work. They used to want to go on outings. Oh, and by the way, how many of us have seen this problem? You have to go on this outing. There's only one staff person and all 4 people need to go. Well, what if this person is experiencing depression and that outing they used to love, you name the outing, it can be anything, bowling, the outing the person used to love is suddenly not something they want to go on. And now you're called in to write a behavior plan, or you are asked to wave your magic wand to encourage this person to go on this outing with everybody else. Maybe the person is so darned blue that they just don't want to go. And you're saying, you used to love going on this. You used to love going to the model. I'm just thinking of all the examples from my career. You used to love going to the model train thing. You used to love going shopping. You used to love going to the grocery store. You used to love conducting this activity on your CSSP in which you go out and buy deodorant. Yeah. And the person doesn't want to. Or the reward program doesn't work anymore. Now we have to ask ourselves, is this depression? Is this the real, no, is this just depression? And what does depression mean? It means that things that somebody used to enjoy or should enjoy, they don't enjoy. Is there any behavior plan in the world that's going to address this? What does the survey say? Ding, 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 or eh. Richard Dawson or the other guy, Steve Harvey, was it? Family Feud?
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard Dawson and Steve Harvey. Now I look at the board and it says 0, 0, 0. It is very difficult to write a behavior plan that's going to make this person want to do the things that they used to or should want to do. We as behavioral professionals need to understand that. And we need to be able to recognize when this might be at play and make appropriate referral and gather information that would be used there. I've worked with any number of people where this is a concern. Now let me make one real tough for you. The person you're thinking of here is a woman with Down syndrome in her 50s who is now refusing things she used to want to do. What might be happening? What are all the things that could be at play? Enter it in the chat room. See what you guys come up with. Oh, I see one answer up already. Just kidding. What could it be? Could it be?
Menopause.
Menopause? Absolutely. What else could it be?
Depression.
Dementia. Thank you for the person who put that into the chat. Dementia.
Depression as well.
Depression? Or the person who's simply tired of doing the same thing because they've been doing the same thing for so long? The person could be starting to think about retirement as opposed to other stuff? Wait a minute, I'm in my 50s. So it could be any number of things. Your functional assessment, oh, this is me, I was the behavior specialist working on it. My functional assessment for this woman had to consider all of these different factors. And remember, depression doesn't just look like stereotypical depression. There can be agitated depression as well. I just have to give a quick nod to National Association of Dual Diagnosis. What I mean is the organization formerly known as National Association of Dual Diagnosis, which is now known as NADD, Advancing Mental Wellness for Persons with Intellectual or Developmental Disabilities, the Diagnostic Manual for Intellectual Disability, published by NADD, jointly created by the American Psychiatric Association, lists how every single different mental health disorder might look for persons with ID. And the likelihood of an agitated depression is much higher, they list, for persons with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So, consider whether depression can look a little bit different. Now, for the woman I just mentioned, what do you think it was? It was depression. It was absolutely depression. And what was fascinating is there was a lengthy referral process to get her to somebody who understood the nature of mental health disorders among people with ID. But before that referral came through, because you had to challenge, we just did a bunch of things to increase her mental wellness and give her more fun activities to do. And just by virtue of lifestyle changes, the depression did lift. So it was not an intractable depression. The depression did lift. A lot of other people said, oh, this is just early dementia. Could have been any one of those things. But we found out that it largely was around depression, and I think she had just kind of gotten tired of doing the same things year in and year out, and had just gotten into a blue funk, which could be identified as depression. Now let's take it to look at another tough one. Here we have somebody with post-traumatic distress disorder. Now, PTSD, what might we see here is that certain events which might seem commonplace to anybody else, behaviorally, can be seen to cause extreme levels of avoidant behavior, which can be misinterpreted as many different mental health disorders or socially motivated aggression. These can differ from day to day, week to week, month to month, and also season to season. How many of you have worked with people where when you look at the data, there's a really high number of challenging behaviors during certain events, seasons, or times of the year? Well, you can look at that and say, oh, this person just really hates Christmas or, winter holiday. Or you can look at it and say maybe this is a symptom of a post-traumatic stress disorder with an anniversary component of it. So with PTSD, it's critical for us when we see extreme levels of avoidant behavior that might have a common thread or a common theme. Is there post-traumatic stress disorder which is driving that? This often requires intensive data collection and might require data collection over many years or looking retrospectively back over many years. And what group of clinicians knows about data? Behavioral folks. So we are very familiar with strategies for gathering data, gathering relevant information, and also looking at objective reason and facts. This is where our behavioral folks can lend some phenomenal expertise to mental health considerations. We have all got to work together. And I think I'm covering a lot of my last few slides already. So when we get to those, we'll be able to zip through. But we can all work together and bring together the things that we are good at. I will tell you that I was working with one young man who had phenomenal levels of aggression towards certain people around Christmas, Thanksgiving, Labor Day, and July 4th. What's in common about those days? Throw it into the chat box. I'll be quiet and let you think for a moment. This is a brain teaser. What happens on those holidays? Family parties that often include a lot of alcohol. Just my family. I'm not talking about your family. Oh, somebody got it?
Yeah, well, holidays are stressful. Lots of family time, changes in routine, etc. Someone else said change in routine, not working on days, being home.
Yeah. So those are things that are in common for those holidays. Now let me throw in one more fact. I mentioned to you the aggression targeted some people. Those people are men with beards. Now, we are purely inferring at this moment, because this individual, the level of intellectual disability was such that reporting was not possible. holiday parties, lots of drinking, men with beards. Now, of course, when I first was looking at these data, I thought, oh, it's got to be Santa Claus. And then I saw that it was the other holidays too. So what does that tell us? Throw it in the chat box. What does that tell us? It means that we have to figure out the PTSD, and that is a critical component. It took data collection covering many years to track this down. Fascinating, fascinating project. Now, we know that we've got to be really looking at trauma-informed care for this person. Treatment of the aggression itself is going to be doing very little unless we can also start to work on treating the trauma. Which brings me to one other thing, which is that we need to be conversant and at least knowledgeable about different mental health interventions as well as ABA or other behavioral modes of intervention. We cannot practice everything, but we need to know when we need to reach out to other partners to work together. So how do we do this? What is one of those key things? Well, what I say is you've got to include the understanding of the challenging behavior into our 4-component model of problem behavior. I really like that term. It is a model of behavior. It's a model that it can't explain everything, but you try to bring together as much as you can. And again, that is done by gathering information about the setting event or establishing operation, the trigger or antecedent, the problem behavior, and then the motivator or maintaining or consequence function. Let's take a look. Here's somebody I worked with. This is a person with depression and with low coping skills, not all that interested in work, and to make matters worse, just got dumped by boyfriend. So the person is now cute about going to work, and the person ignores the cue. What do we do when somebody ignores our cue? We repeat it. So now the cue turns into an argument. What do we do when somebody's arguing? We continue to argue. So now we've got massive aggression. Because aggression occurred, the person gets to avoid going to work. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because when you don't go to work, what happens?
You don't get paid.
You don't get paid. And now you're no longer going to work. This should be something that the woman cares about, because work and paycheck used to be an incentive. And now those things are gone. So what happens is depression. Now we spiral down. So how does this help? Because without the understanding of the depression and the low coping skills, we are not going to be able to solve the problem. When you look at it like this, raise your hand if you've already started to brainstorm. Oh, I could do this. Oh, I could do that. I'll just be quiet and let you think for a moment, which is another way for saying my allergies are kicking up. So, did you come up with some cool ideas for this? You probably did. One of the reasons I like pulling this model together is that it helps teams start to brainstorm. So what I'll do when I'll work with somebody who's experiencing challenging behaviors is I will always start the intervention design process by getting this model up. And it brings everybody together and gets everybody on the same page. That is particularly important when we have to consider both behavioral and mental health interventions together. So I was presenting at a conference some years ago, and I was talking about how to include mental health diagnosis into a functional assessment. And this old gentleman came up to me at the end. He didn't raise his hand and ask a question, but he comes up to me at the end and says, "That's an interesting way to summarize things. Have you heard of the multimodal assessment process?" And I looked back at the fella and I said, "Why, certainly, Dr. Gardner," because the fellow who came up to me was Bill Gardner, who invented the multimodal assessment process. And I said, "Yes, and I know I'm sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Washing out certain elements to bring together mental health folks and behavioral folks, which I recognize. We can certainly go for the higher tech ways of looking at things. We can certainly make things more complex with lots of different modes of understanding. However, I always try to use the least technical approach that will get the job done." So I hope at least somebody cracked up at my, well, certainly, Dr. Gardner, story. I thought it was neat. So what do? We look at all the different components. So we can look at the depression there and treat that in many ways, but we also need to look at building coping skills. I would suggest that almost every single behavior intervention I have ever done includes a massive component on teaching coping skills. Probably the other component I have always included, or almost always, as required, is teaching social skills. So many people have very poorly developed coping skills, which is a slippery slope towards developing depression or anxiety disorder without other positive means present. So with this young lady, there was really, middle-aged lady, I'm sorry, young was the last word, there was really a need to work on developing coping skills and also reintroduce things the person wanted to do, starting with leisure skills, and then also building our way back to work when the mood issues ameliorated to the point that the person could tolerate that additional level of stress. Let me say a bit about medications for depression. Most medications for depression do have some side effects. And I ask us whether we teach the person who is now taking the antidepressant about what those side effects are. Particularly, I want to talk about the dizziness and nausea, which often shows up 4 to 6 weeks into starting an SSRI, serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitor. Now, an average person who starts to take an SSRI, when they encounter those couple days of dizziness, nausea, et cetera, will remember, oh, you know what, my doc said something about that. The pharmacist said something about that. My friend said something about that. And then they'll just go like, oh, I'll probably be okay. It'll go away in a few days. Isn't that what they told me? Yeah, that's what they told me. Do we teach people with intellectual or developmental disabilities that fact too? I have seen so many challenging behaviors which occur 4 to 6 weeks after starting an SSRI and I'm getting calls, incident reports, et cetera, saying, they're just acting out. It came out of the blue, like attacking people. And then I'll say back, well, didn't they start taking that SSRI 4 to 6 weeks ago? Let me check. Yeah, so? And then I'll reply back, the person's probably dizzy, and we need to teach the person that this is going to go away in a few days. You may feel nauseous now, but guess what? You'll be okay in a couple days. What can we do to get you through these few days? That is particularly a problem when the staff people at a day program, residential, in-home supports don't even remember or weren't even told that this individual started taking, say, Lexapro 4 to 6 weeks ago. Oh, really? And I'll say, yeah, and that's a side effect. So that is one of the things I've seen so often in my life. How is this relevant? Because our mental health and our behavioral supports need to all come together. And just so everybody knows, I just interlaced my fingers. Let's look at another one. You have somebody who has bipolar disorder, and they're cycling into a manic phase. They're not a good sleeper in general, and they don't have a lot of friends. So what happens, the person will want to continue an activity for many hours into the night, and staff interrupt that activity. Why? Because you should be sleeping now. What happens? The person begins to scream and awakens the rest of the house. So what do staff people do? They allow the individual to return to the activity since it's quieter than screaming, and then just say, oh, well, whatever. What happens now? Well, you've also just reinforced somebody for screaming. So the person will begin to use screaming as a socially motivated behavior to get people to withdraw requests or limits or whatever. So now we have a behavior which begins as a symptom more of a psychiatric disturbance, and now it acquires behavioral characteristics. So here we have an example where somebody is going backwards. Our prior example was moving from behavioral to mental health and such. Now we have a reverse of that, or the converse of that. So critical here again, we understand the nature of the problem behavior, which may be driven by bipolar disorder, cycling into manic, and acquiring purely behavioral characteristics. Once again, we need to look at a person in his or her totality, looking both at the behavioral components and the mental health components. And bipolar disorder can be difficult to diagnose. And there is one person, not this person here, but one person I worked with where I had to look back at numerous years of data, I believe 2.5+ years of data, because the cycle was very long, the individual was very challenging, and staff people who worked with this individual didn't stick around long. So there was no history of the person to be gathered through staff people, so I essentially had to graph this based on births and some sleep data. The sleep data were less believable. The birth data, the equivalent of birth data, this is a different state, but the incident report data was highly believable. And I just realized I have not stopped for questions. So please let's stop for questions for a moment, and then I'll return to my fun examples. And then we'll pause for questions at the end.
Sure, yep, sure. So if anyone has any questions, you can type them into the Q&A box, and Dr. Baker will answer them. we'll wait a little bit, and then we'll start up again, and we will have time for questions at the end.
Somebody must have a question. The silence isn't at all uncomfortable.
All right, well, we will keep going, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to write them into the Q&A box, and we'll take them.
Of course, I interpret this as meaning everybody has fallen asleep. Don't worry, my feelings aren't hurt. This happens a lot. Next up. That line is completely ripped off from the movie Next Stop Wonderland by Brad Anderson. Awesome movie, incredible, very cool date movie too. My wife and it's our favorite date movie for my wife and I. Great. Okay, so now rolling along. Let's look at this example. We want to have an in-home supports example too. Of course, we have somebody with autism, generalized anxiety disorder, low tolerance for frustration, and major history of conflict with family. Lots and lots of stress and struggle. And we know, when I started in this field, there was a thought that if you had autism, you could not also have generalized anxiety disorder. What you saw as symptoms were merely symptoms of the autism. Survey says, Steve Harvey, no, that is not true. They often will co-occur. They often will co-occur, but one can have autism spectrum disorder and also generalized anxiety disorder. What happens here? Family member interrupts routine. Oh, let's say the routine involved here is being in a parking lot of a shopping area and wanting to find the one white van and needing to touch the door of it. Family member interrupts that routine out in the middle of the parking lot, and the individual strips as a sign of frustration and then is allowed to return to the routine. We know that routine is extraordinarily important for people with autism spectrum disorder. And you can say all you want. You can say it all you want, that there is a need to follow routine, but is that feasible? In the real world, especially in a family home, you cannot say always follow the routine because something inevitably will go wrong, whether it is inclement weather, whether it is family member gets sick, whether it is there's no white van in this parking lot anywhere. Routines can be hard to always assure. So we need to teach people understanding of the fact that routines break. We also need to teach management of anxiety. We also need to teach tolerance to frustration. We also need to work within family systems. Working within family systems is absolutely critical and important. And I want to highlight here teaching tolerance for frustration. That is so important, both in terms of an intervention for the anxiety disorder, and it's also important for people with autism when they're frustrated because their routine breaks. So one of my tricks in teaching tolerance for frustration is I will deliberately pre-correct how to handle the frustration, I will cue it before it occurs, and then I will deliberately introduce a mildly frustrating event. One that I've worked with a lot was when somebody, Carol Riccamato, I believe you're on this call, a few of you heard this on Monday, but I was working with somebody who would, when frustrated, would just smash, Hulk smash object and just break stuff. And what I do is this individual loved making peanut butter jelly sandwiches, could do it on his or her own, and then I would deliberately screw the top of the peanut butter on extra tight. So I know this will frustrate the person, and again, this is done with full team consent. Everybody agrees it's reasonable. Everybody agrees it needs to get done. And then as the person starts to twist, you can see the frustration starting to show up on the face. And then I cue again, oh, you're frustrated with this. Let me help. Let me assist. How do you ask for help? Or whatever is most reasonable for the person. How do you problem solve? And then teach that in vivo, in real life circumstances, as needed with a lot of assistance. The other thing this does is it starts to build a history of success. When we think of self-esteem, that's a squishy subject. That's an internal concept that is not behavioral in nature, but it's real. And I'll quote my former boss, Rob Horner, and say that that is defined as how somebody would code themselves versus the rest of the world. Rest of the world this, me that. Rest of the world can handle life, me not handle life. Rest of the world can deal with things, me cannot deal with things. The other important thing is building a history of success that when you get frustrated, you just don't break stuff. You can persevere and you can make it work for yourself. That needs to be addressed as well. So here, I am deliberately and specifically not just trying to teach how to handle the frustration. I'm deliberately and specifically teaching the person when they get frustrated, they can win. They don't need to break that peanut butter into a million tiny pieces and now have the peanut butter full of broken glass so you can't eat it anyway. We need to teach people. Oh, and by the way, yeah, I know there's plastic peanut butter jars too. I know that. But in the real life circumstance, this is a glass peanut butter jar. And how many of you remember these little silly events and you're like, score, me win? I was doing a session at APBS, Association for Positive Behavior Support, and Ted Carr, who's one of my heroes, was in the room, and I made him laugh by saying APBS when telling this story. I said, hey, that's like APBS. That stands for the Association for Peanut Butter Sandwiches. I made him laugh, and I thought, score one for me. That's one of those bucket list things. I also made Ivar Lovas laugh once. Yep. Plus Lou Whitaker, my ice climbing champion, too. So lots of cool stuff. Why do I tell that story? Okay, it was funny, but also there's a reason for it. How many people you support have never gotten a single bucket list item off their checklist? How many people you support even have a bucket list, even have cool things they want to do, even have a memory of, oh, there was something cool that I did? That is so important for people's mental wellness, and is also so important for people who have no history of success. So, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was reading about positive psychology, and I started to think, how can I build this into my positive behavior support plan? Your CCSPs, your STPs, all of your behavior plans. How can we start to build that in? And I started to work with people with disabilities to even be able to identify a dream they have. And then how do you think about that dream? Even little silly stuff. And then how do you remember that dream? Accomplishment. And then how do you, when stressed, remember that accomplishment so you don't get so stressed and you don't get upset and become aggressive, become self-injurious, bail out of stuff, sleep all day rather than going to work or whatever. So as you are working with people, think about those fun little bucket list things. Everything from riding a roller coaster to going to a theme park, to meeting a Disney character. Who do they have at Valley Fair? They have the characters walking around at Valley Fair amusement park? Okay, let's say it's Daffy Duck. So finding all those things. I actually looked that up so I could give an example, and now I can't remember now that I need it. Valley Fair in Shakopee. That is not a paid announcement. Good. Okay, cool. So last example here, which directly ties to this.
We do have a couple questions.
Oh, thank you. Questions.
One wanted to know if there are any plans for updating the DMID textbook from NADD to reflect the DSM-5.
Oh, brilliant question. Give yourselves a hand for asking that. The DMID is based on the DSM-4 TR, the old version of the Diagnostic Manual on Psychiatric Diagnosis Disorders. The DMID-2 is in the development phase. It is not available yet. Last I heard, APA was looking it over with a fine-tooth comb and making sure it absolutely fit their standards as well. That should be out very, very soon. Okay. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, good to know. We have another question wanting to know if you can share behavioral in your experience, do you have behavior interventions for individuals with disabilities in which threatening behavior works as an escape, but then also keeps the staff safe? So what is the best intervention in balancing safety and effectiveness?
Making sure I understand that. So staff people pose a request or something. The individual says, if you request that, I'm going to hit you. And then you don't want to, of course, reward that by saying, okay, I withdraw my request, but you don't want people to get hit either. Absolutely. I've run into that so many times. I'm not going to give the simple, oh, here's what you do, because there's a complex answer to that. The guidelines you use for addressing that, number one is yes, people need to be safe. Number two, does the requests that are being made, does the person understand the reasonable nature for that? Number three, does the person have a reason to perform those things? Number four, if not, then we might need to introduce something to change that so that those requests are for things the person values, and that might include use of some type of incentive or natural reward things. And then number five, teach the person a response which is not making a physical threat. What I have found is that if the requests are things that are meaningful to the person, they're going to use that threatening response less. And if they have some control over the situation, in a positive manner, they will begin to threaten less over time. People often want control. They often want to be able to schedule and plan, et cetera, et cetera. So those are really the 5 points I would look at in responding to your very, very good question. And yes, I've run into that so many times. Thank you.
Okay. We have one more question.
Good deal.
All right. So in a situation such as when you spoke about the white van not actually existing in the parking lot, so how would you deliberately teach coping for that situation? Then to while also encouraging staying safe in a public parking lot where there are a lot of other stimuli going on.
We'll say safe and closed.
Yes.
Because that was a specific example there. Let me go back one slide. 2 slides. Oh, darn it. Where was it? There it is. Oh, that one's actually still on. Good. Never mind. So there, what you're going to do is teach what to do when your object of interest is not in play. So what do you do when you can't complete your preferred ritual? And you're going to teach that for other times, and you're going to teach that for other situations when it is not such a high valence due to the illegal nature of being naked in a parking lot. So you're going to teach that in other circumstances. And what you're going to teach is what to do when. What to do when I cannot find the 5th banister on the railing. What to do when I don't have another quarter to spin. What to do when I don't see another car that I want to find. What to do when I find that white van and the driver is standing there and they're looking really, really mad and they look like they might get violent if I touch their car. That happened too. So what you're going to do is try to teach the alternate response, both as coping and what to do when. Now, one situation I did was what they ended up doing is having a next time white van picture. And they had that picture, and they would take it out and hold the picture if they didn't find the white van. So that is one of the strategies I would use there. Good.
All right.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Excellent. So let's go on to the next one. How many of us love borderline personality disorder? I will quote my old friend, my beloved friend and mentor, Mike Mayer, who passed away last year. He had this great quote, "Sure, you can work with borderline, but only one at a time." Of course, he's just joking. Well, he was serious when he said that. So here's one where you got somebody with borderline personality disorder. This is a day program where there's lots of staff turnover. This individual who has borderline wants to be in charge of the day program. They want to be the one running the entire show. And there's a new manager at the day program who's creating conflict among care providers who are working at that day program. So you got staff arguing, and this individual with borderline, who's very capable of working in the community, but there may have been an incident at the Stop and Shop, which resulted in them not working there anymore and being back at the day program. I won't say anything further about what that was, but this person with borderline personality disorder hears staff people arguing. So realize amongst themselves, so this individual realizes it's like they're at the Jackpot Mystic Lake Casino. Right? Mystic Lake is here?
I think so.
Yeah, or that's one. Yes, Mystic Lake is here. I didn't want to say that one that's in Atlantic City because it closed. But you know, it's like they're at the casino and they pull the handle on the one-armed bandit and $3 signs pop up. So this individual with borderline is like, oh my God, this is going to be so much fun. So that individual goes and starts doing all of this awesome to her splitting of staff. Carol, you're not going to believe what Charles said about you yesterday. I can't believe you would have said that. And then going to Charles and saying, Charles, when you were there, you know, I didn't want to tell you this, but I think I should let you know what Carol thinks about you, know, and just does all this splitting behavior, which makes the arguments very, very intense, and then the person with borderline gets to sit back and watch the drama. Now, how many of you, this story absolutely rings true and you've seen that? I can't see your hands going up, but I imagine quite a few of you do have their hands. You have your hands going up. So here, your intervention is going to be informed by both the real life circumstances and also the nature of the borderline personality disorder. Now, this borderline personality disorder essentially plays out as an insatiable desire for drama and control and watching chaos. Now, what does that mean in behavioral terms? Those things are the most reinforcing and rewarding events ever. And this individual will go to any lengths to create drama and fun and chaos. We cannot do a good job of supporting her until we give other ways to create that, which are positive. And here again, your wellness interventions are often what helps resolve this behavioral component of borderline personality disorder. What's the number one thing you can do to find drama in your life? Join a drama class. So amongst all of the other interventions we did to properly guide and structure interactions with her, teach staff people not to argue in front of her, teach staff people not to say stuff about each other when she can overhear, but also to get her into positive ways to create drama. This involved a good, close partnership between her residential program and her employment program. So here I'm saying we need to have that broader team. And with her, we were able to create some good success. So what are the implications of everything I've talked about so far today? Number one is your FBA process can yield information about the relationship of biopsychosocial variables that look at both the individual and the environment. Your FBA pulls this all together. This is most important for people who have intellectual or developmental disabilities who do not communicate well. The data we gather can be of unbelievable importance because diagnoses of mental health disorders are often made by the doctor looking at you and saying, "So how are you feeling today?" And then you answer her and you tell her what's going on. And then she asks a few more questions and then a diagnosis is made. For people who cannot self-report, whether that's due to communication difficulties or a lack of self-awareness, your FBA can be critical. And it helps identify clinical features and use FBA strategies to improve support. And again, I love that graphic 4-column summary. What are the implications for intervention? In your common clinical practice, psychiatric and behavioral interventions are managed separately. That is wrong. That is not best practice because what you're doing is you're essentially carving up the person and giving different pieces to different people who don't communicate. The FBA can help resolve that because if we reconceptualize mental illness as a setting event, a single document can bring together the disparate philosophies of understanding a person's behavior. And when we bring those together, we can create better interventions. In summary, I'll leave you with a couple thoughts. Number one, the behavior of people with IDD and MI is often interpreted by others as random or incomprehensible. People throw up their hands and say, "I don't know." They throw up their hands in Jersey and say, "I got no idea." So what are you going to do? They just act out. What are you going to do? So what I have tried to do is make it telegraphic. We understand the function, and we use that to guide subsequent intervention, revealing the relationship between internal setting events and environmental events. What do I recommend? Psychiatric diagnosis with a clinician who's familiar with developmental disabilities. And then complete the FBA that includes consideration of those relevant psychiatric disorders. Now, look at that item number 1. What if that's not happening now? Do you have to wait? No. It helps if you've got that competent diagnosis, but in the absence of such, still move ahead identifying the patterns. And the patterns you see can then be used by the diagnostician. And your plan of treatment addresses both psychiatric and behavior analytic components, bringing it all together. What do I recommend also? Your plans should include attention to lifestyle and wellness, using both assessment of wellness and person-centered information. You use your FBA to help identify times and situations that are associated with higher probabilities of problem behavior. And your plan should consider behavior which is initially maintained by physiological influences, which then become maintained by social attention once the illness, whether physical or mental health in nature, has abated. If I learn that screaming gets me what I want, maybe it's being used to get me what I want when I'm not physically well, let's say I'm suffering from tree-related allergies, or I'm suffering from anxiety disorder, even after that illness has abated, I may have learned that some things get me what I want and they're maintained by social attention. I mentioned that earlier, but I just want to wrap up with that. And I have left 10 minutes for further Q&A.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And we have a few more questions that have come in. And to everyone on the line, just a reminder that you can submit your questions via the Q&A box. We have a question on who, based on your recommendations, who would be doing the FBA? Who would be completing the FBA here?
That would be done by a competent behavior analyst as defined in the Positive Supports Transition Rule. But I would also say that people who are directly on the team, family members, care providers, often have the most significant depth of information regarding the person. Carol, is there anything to add from the Positive Supports Rule or 245D?
No, I think that the Positive Supports Rule lines out what a competent professional would be, so you can look to that for guidance. And you also heightened that it should be really a team effort with lots of people involved, including the person.
Yeah.
All right. We have another question about any ideas regarding working with a client who has intermittent explosive disorder. Do you have any experience with that?
Yes, I sure do, and I think we all do. The problem with intermittent explosive disorder as a diagnosis is that it means what? Not much. You know, so it says that every now and then the person blows. So when you're working with somebody who's got intermittent explosive disorder, it really is no different than any other challenging behavior. You've got to figure out what things are the triggers, and really what that diagnosis gives you is a heightened awareness that the person will intermittently engage in high-intensity behaviors. It gives you no more information, I think, than just saying the person every now and then engages in real high-intensity behaviors. And I'm just giving you my clinical experience, so it's going to be a matter of developing a competent, very thorough functional behavior assessment, which looks at gathering data over a long period of time. And tragically, what I often see is either people have not enough data or they have too much. I rarely see Goldilocks where they have just the right amount. People often collect a lot of data, which is then never used for any purpose whatsoever. Use the data you have and tailor your data collection schemes to give you what you need to know to track progress, compliance with rules, and make decisions about support. Thank you. I wish I had a better answer to your very simple question.
All right. And people who have questions about resources, you are welcome to email the Positive Supports email box, which is positivesupports@state.mn.us. We can kind of help get you a more individualized response there. And as well as if anyone has any recommendations or requests for upcoming Community of Practice webinars, please also feel free to send them in to DHS Positive Supports. We'd like to accommodate you as well as best we can. Although I'll definitely be putting in the plugs for your mental wellness Community of Practice.
I already pestered Charles about it. I don't think it's scheduled yet, though. So in other words, I'll come up with fake emails, and I'll send in, hey, you should have a webinar about mental wellness.
You just unveiled your master plan.
Okay, darn it.
There's a question that came in through chat that I don't think you guys are able to see. Asking, is there a good FBA form, or does it need to be tailored to each client?
Well, I certainly know that Minnesota is in the process of developing a template. I think personally that the O'Neill materials are phenomenal. I still use O'Neill's second edition. Why is that? Because there's now a third edition of the O'Neill book about functional assessment that is just a staggering quantity, and I don't know if it's added anything new. I'm still using O'Neill, the second edition one. You can purchase that for cheap on Amazon, used. I didn't just say that. And definitely look at the last page of it, which is where they have the 4-column graphic summary.
Okay, yeah. Once again, if you have questions on specifically locating a resource, you can email Positive Supports with those questions. But if we have any, do we have any other questions for Dr. Baker? Feel free to, we have a few minutes left, so feel free now to submit them to the chat box.
I really enjoy talking. Forgive me if I spoke too fast.
Nice.
Just getting in one more press just to cover the time here. Thinking about Prince.
All right. Well, I would like to thank you for a very informative and entertaining webinar. We appreciate you being able to accommodate us, and we know that we've gotten a lot of questions, so I hope that everyone on the line found this as informative as I did, and we thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about something that I really love and that I feel is so important in our efforts to improve supports for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities.